The universe did not scream when the Grand Priest died. It merely shuddered, a collective gasp of terror that rippled through the fabric of all 12 dimensions. The space where the highest angel had stood was now a jagged scar in reality, a void rapidly filling with the shimmering, oppressive residue of platinum dragon energy. Goku stood amidst the falling sparks of the priest's halo, his chest heaving not from exhaustion, but from the sheer density of the power coursing through his new biology. His eyes, vertical slits of burning crimson set within pools of ancient gold, drifted upward. He looked past the debris, past the kneeling angels who were paralyzed by an emotion they had never known, fear, and locked his gaze onto the floating palace above. There, suspended in the void, the two Omni Kings, the Zenos, drifted back. Their childlike hands, usually so steady in their play, were trembling. For the first time in the history of existence, the gods of everything looked down at a mortal and saw not a toy but a predator. The era of their absolute rule had ended the moment the Grand Priest's body turned to dust. Now, only the execution remained. To witness the moment the hierarchy of the cosmos is rewritten and the impossible becomes reality, anchor your soul to this narrative. Do not look away, lest you miss the birth of a new god. The silence that followed the death of the Grand Priest was heavier than any star. It was not merely the absence of sound. It was the sudden, violent suffocation of authority. For billions of years, the multiverse had hummed with a specific frequency, a subtle vibration that emanated from the halo of the High Minister, a constant, subconscious reminder to every living deity that there was a law, a ceiling, and a punisher. Now that frequency had been severed. The air in the null realm, usually sterile and timeless, tasted suddenly of ozone and ancient wet iron, particles of blue and white light. The final remnants of the Grand Priest's physical form drifted down like snow upon a grave. They did not dissolve into the void. They seemed to cling to the ground, afraid to vanish, as if the universe itself could not process the data of its own guardian's demise. Standing amidst this glittering burial was the entity that had once been Son Goku. He did not look triumphant. There was no Saiyan roar of victory, no raising of a fist to the heavens. He stood perfectly still, his chest rising and falling in a slow tectonic rhythm. The transformation into the Platinum Dragon King had rewritten his physiology entirely. The savage, jagged edges of his earlier berserker forms had been smoothed into a terrifying elegance. His scales were not merely armor. They were plates of calcified reality, shining with a luster that seemed to absorb the ambient light of the void. His tail, thick and muscular, lay coiled behind him, the tip twitching with the residual adrenaline of the kill. But it was his eyes that told the true story of the cosmos's new alignment. The familiar warmth of the earth-raised Saiyan was gone, replaced by the vertical crimson slits of a predator that had existed before time began. He looked down at his own hand, the claws stained with the ethereal blood of an angel, and flexed his fingers. The sound of his scales grinding against each other was the only noise in existence, a sharp, metallic rasp that made the surviving angels flinch. Wise and Vados, beings who had watched galaxies burn and abide with indifferent smiles, were now statues of dread. They stood on the periphery of the shattered arena, their staffs growing cold and heavy in their hands. The bond, that intricate telepathic web that connected all angels to their Father, had snapped. It was a psychic backlash that felt like a scream in their minds, followed instantly by a hollow, aching quiet. Whis's grip on his staff tightened until the wood groaned, his knuckles white. He looked at the spot where his father had stood, then at Goku, and for the first time in his immortal life, he did not calculate the odds. There were no odds. The variable standing before him defied the equation entirely. He is gone, Vados whispered, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. It was not a question. It was a terrifying confession. The hierarchy, the perfect ladder of power that placed mortals at the bottom and angels at the top, had been inverted. The creature breathing in the center of the arena was not a mortal using God Key. It was a usurper who had broken into the house of the gods and slaughtered the caretaker. The surviving angels instinctively lowered their heads, not out of loyalty, but out of a primal, biological submission to the apex predator. They could feel the radiation of the dragon god's aura, a dense, heavy pressure that felt less like energy and more like gravity. It pulled at their souls, demanding they kneel or be crushed. High above the arena, floating in the kaleidoscope palace that drifted in the infinite nothingness, the silence was broken. The two Zenos, the Omni Kings who played with universes as if they were marbles, sat frozen on their thrones. Their legs, usually kicking with childish delight, hung limp. Their blank oval eyes were wide, fixed on the scene below. They had watched the battle with the excitement of a game, clapping as the lights flashed and the dimensions cracked. But when the Grand Priest's light went out, the game stopped. The future Zeno leaned forward, his small hands gripping the armrests of his floating chair. "Nay? Zeno?" he murmured, his voice trembling with a frequency that made the palace walls shudder. "The priest? He isn't moving. Why isn't he moving?" The present Zeno did not answer immediately. He was processing a sensation he had never felt before. It was a coldness in his chest, a tightening of his throat. It was the feeling of being small. "He broke," the present Zeno whispered, the realization dawning with the slow, crushing weight of a collapsing star. "Goku broke him." Down in the wreckage, Goku's head snapped up. The motion was instantaneous, ignoring the drag of air resistance. His vertical pupils locked onto the two small figures floating miles above him. The distance meant nothing. The void meant nothing. He could see their fear. It pulsed around them like a frantic heartbeat. A low growl started deep in Goku's throat, a sound that vibrated not through the air but through the fabric of space itself. It was the sound of a beast acknowledging its prey. He took a step. The void beneath his foot cracked, spiderwebs of white fissures spreading out into the darkness. He did not fly. He walked, ascending an invisible staircase composed of his own will. Each step was a thunderclap, a deliberate, heavy declaration of his approach. He was coming for the throne. The ascent was slow, agonizingly deliberate. Goku did not rush. He had no need for speed, for he was no longer fighting against time. He was dismantling it. Each footfall upon the invisible stairs sent a tremor through the void, a rhythmic thud that echoed in the chests of the Omni Kings. It was the sound of a nightmare walking out of a dream and into the room. Up in the palace, the atmosphere of divine detachment had shattered completely. The Xenos scuttled back in their floating chairs, their small booted feet kicking at the air. The concept of a threat was alien to them. Throughout the infinite history of the multiverse, they had been the observers, the judges, the final period at the end of every sentence. They had never been the subject of a sentence. But now, the red-scaled demon rising from the abyss was looking at them not with reverence, but with hunger. "He is coming up," the future Zeno squeaked, his voice cracking. He pointed a trembling finger at the approaching figure. "Why is he coming up? We didn't say he could come up." "He is scary," the present Zeno whispered, clutching his own face. "He broke the priest. He is bad. Bad things must go away." The simplicity of their logic was terrifying. To a child, a broken toy is a nuisance. To a god, a broken universe is a mistake. But to the Omni Kings, a being that caused them fear was an error in the code of reality that required immediate deletion. The panic in their eyes hardened into a petulant, destructive resolve. They did not know how to fight. They had never thrown a punch in their lives, but they knew how to end things. Simultaneously, the two monarchs floated up from their thrones. They did not assume a martial arts stance. There was no grace in their movement, only the clumsy, absolute authority of creators who had decided to become destroyers. They raised their small hands, palms facing the ascending dragon god. "Go away!" they screamed in unison. The sound of their voices was not loud, yet it tore the sky. The laws of the null realm began to unravel. The colorful, psychedelic nebula that served as the backdrop for the world of void instantly desaturated. Color drained from the cosmos, sucked into the palms of the Zenos. The purple of the void, the gold of the distant stars, even the blue skin of the trembling angels below. Everything turned into a stark, high-contrast monochrome. The universe was being primed for a reset. A white light began to gather in front of the Omni Kings. It was not the warm, golden light of Kai, nor the purple entropy of destruction. It was the sterile, blinding white of erasure. It was the light of the blank page. It hummed with a frequency that made the teeth of the gods ache. This was the power that had wiped out Zamasu, that had erased 6 universes in a fit of anger, that held the 18 cosmos in a chokehold of terror. Below, Whis fell to his knees, shielding his eyes. The intensity of the light was burning the retinas of even the angels. They are not holding back," he choked out, his voice lost in the rising whine of the energy. "They intend to erase the concept of his existence entirely, not just his body, his history, his timeline, his very name." The sphere of erasure grew, dwarfing the palace, dwarfing the arena. It became a second sun, cold and pitiless. The gravity of the attack was so intense that space began to bend toward it, debris from the shattered arena flying upward to be consumed and vanished into nothingness. Goku stopped his ascent. He stood suspended in the gray, lifeless void, illuminated only by the apocalyptic glow of the Zenos' tantrum. The wind whipped against his platinum scales, tearing at his GI, but he did not flinch. He did not raise his guard. He did not charge a Kamehameha. He simply watched, his dragon eyes narrowing slightly, the crimson pupils focusing on the center of the destruction. "Disappear!" the Zenos shrieked, their childish voices overlapping into a distorted harmony of doom. They thrust their hands forward. The white sun collapsed in on itself for a fraction of a second, imploding with the force of 1,000,000,000,000 dead galaxies, and then unleashed a beam of absolute negation. It was a torrent of white silence, a river of non-existence pouring down from the heavens to wash the stain of the dragon god from the face of reality. The beam consumed the space where Goku stood instantly. There was no explosion, for explosions require matter to react. There was simply deletion. The light swallowed him, swallowed the air around him, and continued downward, drilling into the infinite abyss below, erasing the void itself. The Zenos panted, their hands still extended, smoke rising from their small palms. They watched the column of white light rage, their eyes wide with the desperate hope that when the light faded, their nightmare would be gone. The beam of erasure was not a weapon of violence. It was a weapon of correction. It did not burn skin or shatter bone. It edited reality. Inside the blinding column of white that now connected the heavens to the abyss, the fundamental laws of the multiverse were being aggressively rewritten to exclude the variable named Son Goku. The light sought to unwind the threads of his history, to reach back in time and untie the knot of his birth, to make it so that he had never drawn breath, never fought, never existed. It was a mathematical subtraction of the soul, a command from the administrators of the cosmos to delete a corrupted file. In any other era, against any other being, the command would have been absolute. Gods of destruction, angels, Kais, all were woven from the fabric of the multiverse, and thus they were subject to the king who held the scissors. But the entity standing within the white torrent was no longer woven from that fabric. Time slowed to a metaphysical crawl. Inside the roaring silence of the beam, the erase energy clawed at Goku's form. It stripped away the ambient dust, the air, the light, and the very coordinates of space he occupied, But when it touched the platinum scales, the light hesitated. The scales of the dragon god were not biological matter. They were crystallized fragments of Zalama's will, the will of the creator of the Super Dragon Balls, a being who existed in the forbidden realm outside the Zeno's jurisdiction. If Zeno was the editor of the story, Zalama was the paper it was written on. The erasure energy washed over the platinum armor, frantically trying to find a purchase, a flaw, a vulnerability to exploit. It searched for mortal key to extinguish, but found only the infinite looping eternity of dragon power. The white light shrieked, a high-pitched psychic whine of dissonance. It was the sound of an unstoppable force colliding with an immovable object. High above, the Zenos gasped. Their arms, extended and trembling, felt a sudden, horrifying resistance. Usually, when they erased something, there was no feedback. It was as simple as blowing out a candle. But now, it felt as though they were trying to push a mountain with their bare hands. The energy was backing up, piling against the resistance below, thickening the beam until it was wide enough to swallow a solar system. It won't go away, the present Zeno cried out, panic rising in his throat like bile. Why won't it go away? Push harder, the future Zeno screamed, tears of frustration gathering in the corners of his eyes. Make it zero! Make it nothing! They poured everything into the strike. The white column intensified, turning from blinding white to a transparent, terrifying clarity. The sheer weight of the erasure crushed the null realm's floor, boring a hole through the bottom of the dimension. The surrounding angels, Whis and Vados included, were forced to conjure barriers just to keep from being pulled into the vacuum of deletion. But in the center of the cataclysm, the silhouette remained. Goku stood with his eyes closed, feeling the tide of negation wash over him. It tickled. That was the horror of it. The ultimate technique of the Omni Kings, the power that kept the multiverse in a chokehold of fear, felt like nothing more than a warm breeze against his new skin. The dragon heart in his chest thumped once, a heavy rhythmic drumbeat that resonated through the erasure beam. Thump! The sound rippled up the column of light, shaking the Zeno's arms. Thump! The platinum scales began to glow. They didn't reflect the erasure, they consumed it. The infinite potential of the Super Dragon Balls was not just immunity, it was dominion. By trying to erase him, the Zenos were feeding him. The erase energy, failing to destroy the target, was simply raw power with nowhere to go, and the dragon body designed to swallow galaxies began to drink it in. The white light started to swirl, losing its cohesion. The straight lines of the beam warped, twisting into a spiral around the central figure. The Zenos shrieked as they felt their own energy being pulled out of them, dragged down the connection they had established. They tried to pull their hands back to cut the flow, but they were locked in. The hunter had become the tether. "Let go!" the Zenos wailed, their divine authority crumbling into the terrified tantrums of children caught in a riptide. Down in the heart of the light, Goku opened his eyes. The crimson pupils were gone. His eyes were now entirely platinum, shining with a light that was older than the Zenos, older than the angels, older than the concept of erasure itself. He didn't speak, but his will projected a single devastating truth upwards, piercing the minds of the Omni Kings. "I am not a mistake you can correct." The connection snapped with the sound of a violin string breaking in an empty hall. The column of white light did not fade gradually, it shattered. Like glass struck by a resonant frequency, the erasure energy fractured into billions of harmless, glittering shards that rained down into the abyss. The Zenos, their tether to the attack severed, were thrown backward by the recoil. They tumbled out of their floating chairs, their small bodies rolling across the cold, polished floor of the palace. They scrambled to their feet, panting, their chests heaving with an exertion they had never experienced in eons of ruling. "Did it go away?" The future Zeno gasped, clutching the hem of his tunic, his eyes squeezed shut. He was afraid to look. For the first time, the king of all was terrified of what he might see. I don't know, the present Zeno whispered, his voice trembling. He slowly opened his eyes, peering over the edge of the palace railing, down into the smoking crater of the void. The mist of creation, the byproduct of the failed erasure, swirled thickly below. It was a fog of unmade reality, gray and dense. For a long, agonizing moment, there was nothing but the silence, the heavy, oppressive silence of a tomb. The Xenos leaned further over, hope kindling in their chests. Perhaps they had done it. Perhaps the resistance had just been a final trick before the end. Perhaps the monster was gone. Then the fog parted. It didn't drift away. It was pushed aside by a presence. Hovering in the center of the void, untouched, unblemished, and undeniably alive, was the Platinum Dragon King. There was no smoke rising from his scales. There was no burn mark on his GI. He was pristine. The erase energy, the ultimate authority of the Omni Kings, had washed over him like water off a duck's back. He hadn't even raised a hand to block it. He had simply let it happen, and it had failed. A sound escaped the present Zeno's throat, a high, thin keen of despair. It was the sound of a worldview collapsing. Their entire identity, their entire purpose was built on a single axiom. Whatever we want to happen, happens. Whatever we want to destroy, disappears. That axiom was now a lie. Goku tilted his head, his neck cracking with a sound like thunder. The platinum scales along his throat shifted, catching the dim light of the distant stars. He looked up, his expression unreadable. It was not the face of a Saiyan warrior seeking a thrill. It was the face of a cosmic inevitability. Slowly, without bending his knees or flaring his aura, Goku began to float upward. He rose past the debris of the arena, past the stunned, kneeling forms of the angels. Whis watched him pass, his eyes wide. The angel of Universe 7 saw something in that moment that chilled his blood. Goku was no longer emitting ki. He was emitting truth. He had become a fundamental constant, a being that existed so absolute that the laws of erasure could not calculate a way to remove him. "He is coming back up!" the Xenos shrieked, scrambling backward until their backs hit the thrones. "Guards! Guards!" But there were no guards. The Grand Priest was dust. The elite attendants had been vaporized by Goku's earlier roar. The Xenos were alone in their palace, trapped in the gilded cage they had built above the multiverse. Goku crested the edge of the palace floor. He didn't land. He hovered just inches above the ground, his toes pointing downward, his 12-foot frame casting a long, jagged shadow over the two trembling monarchs. The psychic pressure in the room was suffocating. The air felt thick, like syrup. The Xenos looked up, their necks craning to meet the gaze of the entity that had usurped their divinity. They looked for mercy. They looked for the friendly Goku who had shaken their hands and promised them a friend, but that Goku was dead, burned away by the betrayal of the angels and the fire of the dragon bloodline. "You tried to unmake me," Goku spoke. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a strange layered quality. Like a choir of dragons speaking in unison, it bypassed their ears and resonated directly in their cores. "You tried to decide that I do not exist." He drifted closer. The Xenos pressed themselves against the thrones, their eyes darting around for an exit, for a button, for anything. "But you are not the authors of this story anymore," Goku continued, his platinum eyes narrowing. "You are just characters in it, and your role is over." The illusion of the Xenos' godhood shattered. They were not omnipotent. They were just children with a loaded gun. And now, the gun had jammed. They stared at their hands, the hands that could wipe out universes, and realized with dawning horror that against the dragon god they were empty. They were no longer the kings of everything. They were simply small beings in the presence of a giant. Panic is a clumsy architect. It builds nothing but chaos. The Xenos, stripped of their composure and their ultimate weapon, dissolved into a frenzy of raw, undirected energy. They did not accept their obsolescence quietly. With high-pitched screams of denial, they launched themselves from their thrones, their small bodies glowing with a chaotic violet aura. They unleashed barrage after barrage of destruction energy, pure, concentrated blasts meant to vaporize galaxies. Go away, go away, go away! The blasts struck Goku's chest with the force of exploding stars. Light flared, blinding and hot, consuming the space between the dragon god and the thrones. The explosions rattled the foundations of the palace, cracking the pillars that had stood since the dawn of time. But Goku did not halt his advance. He did not even blink. The destruction energy splashed against his platinum scales like rain against a mountain, fizzling out into harmless sparks. He walked through the fire, his stride unbroken, his silhouette looming larger and darker through the smoke. He was not fighting them. You do not fight rain, you simply endure it until it passes. Finally, Goku reached the steps of the dais. The Zenos, panting and exhausted, floated backward until their backs pressed against the cold, hard material of their seats. Their energy reserves were dry. Their magic was spent. They looked up, their eyes wide and wet, trembling as the shadow of the dragon god fell over them, swallowing them whole. Goku stopped. He stood tall, a titan of ancient power, looking down at the two beings who had treated the multiverse as a toy box. The silence that stretched between them was heavy with history. For eon again, Goku spoke, his voice vibrating in the very atoms of the palace. You erased what you did not like. You deleted lives because they annoyed you. You deleted universes because you were tired. He slowly raised his hand. The Zenos flinched, covering their heads, expecting the erasure they had dealt to so many others. But no light came. Instead, a crushing, invisible pressure descended upon the dais. It was not Kai. It was authority. The atmosphere around the Zenos became heavier than lead. The anti-gravity magic that allowed them to float failed instantly. With a thud, the two Omni Kings fell to the floor. They tried to rise, to float back up to their station, but the pressure pinned them down. For the first time, they were on their knees. They were grounded. You are not gods, Goku said, lowering his hand. You are children, and playtime is over. A profound stillness settled over the world of void. On the periphery of the palace, the surviving angels, Whis, Vados, and their siblings, drifted silently onto the platform. They saw the impossible. They saw the Grand Priest's dust settling in the wind. They saw the Omni Kings cowering on the floor, stripped of their divinity, and standing above them, radiating a light that was both terrifyingly dark and blindingly bright, was the new apex of creation. There was no discussion. There was no vote. The hierarchy of the angels was programmed to serve the strongest, to attend to the axis upon which the multiverse turned. That axis had shifted. Slowly, with the grace of falling leaves, Whis lowered himself to one knee. Vados followed. One by one, the 12 angels knelt, placing their staffs on the ground, bowing their heads to the figure on the dais. They did not bow to a Saiyan. They bowed to the Dragon King. Goku turned away from the cowering Zenos. He looked at the empty throne, the seat of the highest power, the chair that looked out over the 12 universes. He felt the dragon heart within him pulsing, the soul of Zalama settling into a state of permanent, regal calm. The rage of the battle was gone, replaced by the heavy, cold burden of responsibility. He ascended the final step and sat. The moment his body touched the throne, a ripple went out across the cosmos. In Universe 7, the skies turned a deep twilight purple. In Universe 6, the stars flared with a platinum glow. Across all 12 dimensions, every destroyer, every Kai, every mortal felt a sudden shift in the air, a chill that told them the rules had changed. The chaotic, whimsical era of Zeno was over. The era of the dragon had begun. Goku rested his chin on his hand, his sharp claws digging slightly into the armrest. His vertical pupils glowed in the dim light, staring out into the infinite void, watching the swirling galaxies below. He was no longer a warrior seeking the next fight. He was the guardian of the absolutes, the keeper of a peace forged in dragon fire. The Xenos whimpered at his feet, but Goku did not look down. The gods do not look at the ground. They watch the horizon.